All right, let's dive right into one of India's most talked about financial sagas. It's a story of sky-high ambition, a spectacular collapse, and a massive multi-billion-dollar dispute. And at the heart of it all, two completely different versions of the truth. We're going to break down both of them.
Just think about that statement for a second. It really frames the entire conflict we're talking about. On one hand, you've got the public image of a celebrated tycoon who fell from grace, and on the other, you have his account of a targeted, deliberate downfall, a hero to a zero. So the big question is, how on earth did it happen?
To understand the airline, you first have to understand the brand. And this brand was built so carefully, so meticulously, around this one very specific persona: success, glamour, and just living life to the absolute fullest.
And that public image, well, that was the marketing strategy. The personality and the products became totally inseparable. See, it wasn't just about selling a product, it was about selling a lifestyle people wanted to be a part of. And that strategy, it made the brands wildly successful.
So what do you do with all that brand power? Well, in 2005, the answer was you launch an airline. And the goal here wasn't small. No, it was incredibly ambitious, to completely redefine what it felt like to fly in India.
And this was not just another airline. It was designed from the ground up to be a premium experience. You weren't a passenger, you were a guest. Everyone got in-flight entertainment, the food was better, and this focus on service really paid off. By 2008, Kingfisher was the largest airline in the entire country, with a massive 27% of the market share. So they're at the absolute peak of their success. And right at that moment, they make this pivotal and very, very debated decision to buy a low-cost airline. You have to remember this move because it's absolutely central to how everything unraveled. And right here is where those two different narratives we talked about really begin to clash. The public saw this as a shortcut, a way to get around a rule that said you had to fly domestically for 5 years before you could fly internationally. But the business logic was supposedly very strategic: buy out a low-price competitor who was driving down ticket prices for the entire industry.
But the timing could not have been worse. Just as the airline takes on all this massive new debt, a perfect economic storm hits. The 2008 global financial crisis kicks in, and at the exact same time, crude oil prices just go through the roof. So you've got this huge debt from the acquisition on one side and these soaring costs on the other, and it sent the airline into a complete financial nosedive. It went from being the market leader to total collapse, and honestly, it never stood a chance of recovering. I want you to focus on this one number, $140. That was the price for a single barrel of crude oil. Now, for any airline, fuel is by far their single biggest expense. So at a price like that, just operating the planes became catastrophically unprofitable. This was a disaster, and not just for Kingfisher, but for the entire industry. Now, here's another critical piece of the story. In the middle of this crisis, the claim is that the government's finance minister actually urged the airline not to downsize, with the promise that state-owned banks would provide the support to keep them flying. This becomes really crucial later on. And this brings us right to the heart of the whole dispute. So, which was it? A legitimate business failure that was just sunk by a perfect economic storm and some tricky government policies? Or was it a deliberate fraud from the start, a scheme to mislead banks and misuse the loans they were given? And on that really painful issue of employees not getting paid, the counter-narrative offers this number: 260 crores. The claim is that this money was available and was formally requested from the court to pay salaries, but that the banks themselves objected and had the funds frozen. So let's fast forward to March 2016. This is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. It's the story of a departure from India that would pretty much seal the public's image of him as a fugitive. But again, it's not quite that simple. Let's just look at the timeline. On March 2nd, he leaves India for what his team says was a scheduled meeting. Okay, a little over a month later, his passport gets suspended. Then just 9 days after that, it's completely revoked by the government. From his side of the story, this made it impossible to return. So what do you make of this? Was it a calculated escape, a man fleeing the country to escape justice, or was it, as he claims, a non-resident who traveled for work all the time, who was suddenly and legally stranded abroad when his passport was canceled? The two interpretations could not be more different. So, years later, all the legal and financial battles are still dragging on. But what's really fascinating is that official government figures have come out that raise all new questions about the actual size of the debt itself. Just look at these numbers. The total debt that was claimed, including all the principal and interest, was around 6,203 crores. Yet, according to official government reports, the amount that's actually been recovered from selling off seized assets is over 14,000 crores. That is more than double the total debt. And this fact is central to the argument that this was never about an unwillingness to pay. At the end of the day, the Kingfisher saga leaves us all with this one critical question. In the high-stakes world of business, when you take huge risks, and some of them fail, where do you draw the line between a legitimate business failure and a criminal fraud? It's a question that, in this case, is still being fiercely debated.